Hello, and welcome to our Sunday school with Sarah and Mason. We're Sarah and Mason.
Which one's Sarah? Which one's Mason?
You're Sarah, I'm Mason.
All right, cool.
Alrighty. So today's going to be really tender for me. So instead of a dog, I have a box of Kleenexes. I was going to bring Henry again today, but it is raining in central Missouri, and he loves to roll in the mud. So I don't love him enough to muddy my couch. So he's at home still rolling in the mud. So our topic today is why I still believe in a higher power, a God, an Allah, something divine. I don't necessarily. In Mormonism, when we talked about God, everything was known. You know, he was male. He was a white male. He and Jesus were separate beings. He had a body of flesh and bones like ours. What else, Mason? Like in Mormonism, we had all the answers.
I think that's the bulk of it. Yeah, it was
right.
There was nothing mysterious about God really in any way. His character was understood. His person was understood. Not that we understood everything, but the main things that would make you comfortable, I guess, around him.
So, and I think that in Mormonism and in a lot of religions, they would define what God was or who he was. And I'm using the word he because that's how most of Christianity would view God and or Jesus, depending on if you believe in the Trinity or the dualism, whatever the word is. I'm messing up my words again, of God and Jesus. And I think that was meant to make it more tangible, maybe more real. But when I left Mormonism, one of the questions that was posed to me a lot was, well, what do you believe now? As if I couldn't shift my belief away from Mormonism without a replacement belief. And so in the beginning, I got really comfortable with not knowing. And I would say that's still where I am. There's no way to prove it. And the older I get, the more, scientific method I get, because I can't prove it. I can't touch it. I can't study it. I don't know. And I'm okay saying I don't know, and if I compare that to what I talk about in my clinic, while I'm not allowed to prescribe meds, I do provide a lot of psychoeducation on medications for my clients in order to aid in medication management and medication compliance, should I have a client that needs it, and also to help a client determine whether or not they feel like they want to seek medication treatment. And so I would say that that's really the first place that I got comfortable with. We don't actually know the mechanism of action or what that means. We don't really know how it works or why it works, but in the studies, we're finding that this medication helps with these symptoms. These are the side effects, and then we weigh the benefits and risks of taking a medication. And so that's really where I started with my practice of being okay with not knowing. That kind of grew in clinically for me into, people asking me, why do I feel this way? Or what's the matter with me or whatnot. And we, just getting used to saying, I don't have all of the answers, but these are the things that have worked for me as a professional or work for other clients. Let's give it a try. And then I'm very well known for telling my clients that counseling is a buffet where you take and keep what works and you get rid of the things that don't work. I've tried EMDR. It worked, but it was very limited for me. I have complex PTSD, and EMDR, for those of you who are familiar with eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR technique in therapy, it works really well for single event trauma therefore single event post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's very limited in people who have a diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that complex identifier indicates, repeated traumas or chronic trauma, traumas that happened over a long period of time. And that EMDR really isn't effective for that type of trauma. But we really don't know why EMDR works. Like move your eyes back and forth, or you have little buzzers that buzz your hands alternatively. And we have no idea. Like no scientist can say this is why it works. We have a theory as to why it works, but we don't know why it works. And so being comfortable, because I utilize EMDR in my practice when it's indicated for a client. And I'm telling people all the time, look, we don't really understand what's going on that makes this so effective in single trauma PTSD. We just know that it does help and I don't know the statistic and this, this percentage of people who utilize it, it's effective. And this is what the studies say, but we don't necessarily understand the mechanism of action.
So can I interject for a second?
Please do.
It feels a little bit like, so you're talking about how you kind of moved into using the scientific method a little bit more even with spiritual things. And I think that kind of grows out of the fact that in a lot of religions, certainly in my experience, we were taught that faith trumps all. Mm-hmm. And that you can trust in the faith because the science also, for the most part, backs that up.
Yeah, we actually talked about this.
I'm not done.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you anyway. We actually talked about this. We recorded our information control episode for cults. So timeline, we recorded it, yesterday? Was it yesterday or the Friday?
The day before.
Anyway, we recorded it. And so one of the things that we brought up was that religions basically come in with, there's no way to prove it false. Therefore, it is true by default. So you come in saying God is, and that's considered an absolute truth, despite the fact that there is absolutely no way, and that we know of at this time, to demonstrate that truth, that it's all speculation. It's based on faith.
We might have experiences that make us believe that in our minds it's true.
Right.
And that's fine, but from a scientific perspective, that's not what's going on. But the thing is with faith, if you're taught that faith trumps all and the science supports it, then as you start to learn that that's not true, the science really doesn't support it. Things as simple as the creation. People have argued about the creation forever, the flood, some of these big events that don't seem scientifically possible, not even just scientifically plausible. You start to recognize that the science doesn't really support the faith. And so then you're left with a situation, what do I want to do? Do I want to ignore the logic that exists and just hold to faith? Because now it looks like I can't hold on to both. So you kind of have to make this choice. For you, in medicine, right? For me, in medicine, a lot of people, for us, our daily life is based off of the scientific method. Even things like you said, we don't really know why EMDR works. We don't really know exactly why anesthetic gases work. We think we know, but we don't know for sure, but they work. So you can look at it and go, well, I don't really know how this works, but I know it does because I can use it. Whereas for religion or
because
spirituality,
it's tangible, because you put the mask on and people go to sleep, you take the mask away and they wake up.
They wake up, exactly right. It's something that you can judge every single time you're going to get that response. Right. Whereas with religion and spirituality, there's lots of different responses. Some people might be able to hold on to just the faith and have positive outcomes like that in their lives, and other people are not going to be able to do that. So the scientific method doesn't work to sort out what about religion works. And so kind of once you get to that point, it's almost like you have to choose between the two. It's hard to make both of them work.
I didn't want to make a choice. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that because I couldn't know, I'm going to default to the scientific method, which is I can recognize based on the data that is in the research, what I hear in my clinic, what I've experienced myself, is that belief in a God-like figure, belief in some divine power, prayer, those types of things can be very effective in managing stress and bringing peace and encouraging connection between people and improving individuals' lives. And so when I was leaving Mormonism, I had learned to let go of the idea that I had all the answers for what that higher power was. Like I let go of God is a white male. I let go of God is a tangible being of flesh and bones. I let go of God and Jesus are, the same person. Like, not only did I let go of the Mormon view of God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost are three separate beings, but I also let go of the Trinity idea, the Trinitarian belief that they are all one combined entity acting in different roles. I let go of all of that because there's no way to know. But the piece that I held on to was spirituality and belief in a higher power is beneficial to those who believe it, whether it's the placebo effect or there's something there that is in some way guiding our life. I can't let go of that. So I don't know if y'all can hear this, but my neighbor upstairs is apparently vacuuming and cleaning their office. So if you hear some thumps and buzzing, it's coming from the sky above. It is the God.
It's the higher power trying to make
it's the God in the chiropractic office.
It is the man
above
upstairs.
me. It is the man upstairs. Yes.
Upstairs.
And so really when it came to identifying a higher power, I let go of the idea that God was gendered, that God was even called God. And so I kind of stick with a higher power or a divine source. Those would be kind of the words that I would utilize now, something bigger than me. And so what had happened was several years ago, I'm going to say even from when I was a teenager. So my aunt had a spiritual experience and a near-death experience when she was a young child. And I don't even know how old she was. I'm going to say younger than 10. And I'm not going to share her story here because it's not my story to share. But I remember when I was a kid, my mom utilized my aunt's near-death experience. She would tell that story to us as kids to support the fact that there was a loving God and Jesus in the sky and that there was a heaven, because my aunt had a very, and I'm going to say typical near-death experience. And so anyway, growing up, I became very fascinated because I've always been the type of person where I was like, almost like I wanted to have one of those experiences. And then when I started to struggle with Mormonism, I actually started to pray for a near-death experience. It was like, can I just get in a car accident and almost die? Because I want to be able to walk with Jesus the way that people had talked about, so that I could just ask the question, is the Mormon church true? Because if it's not, like I was like, ooh, but that would give me that sure knowledge that Mormons talk about. But I was like, does it really matter what religion I am? Is the Mormon church a true church, or is it just a good church? Or please, I just need that so that I can let it go. I never had one, which is probably a good thing. But instead, I felt like I needed to study out near-death experiences more, especially because I was working with clients who had talked about having them, and I had 2 colleagues that had had them. And so I started to study near-death experiences. And one of the things that I discovered is that near-death experiences usually all have some really common themes. And those themes are that a lot of them report floating above their body, still on the earth, and they observe what's happening to them from floating in the room above somewhere. And then there's a tunnel of light or a pillar of light, and they kind of like ascend or float up into something very, very light, and they feel unconditionally loved. They feel completely at peace. And then usually there's a choice or a telling of you're not ready yet. And then they come back, enter their body. And then after the near-death experience, they are more altruistic. They're more loving. They're more kind. They're more generous. Things, the details and things, including religion, usually disappear. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating. And so there were two books that I read that really resonated with me. So I've read near-death experience books. I've probably read 10 to 20 of them. And one of the things I know, and so one of the things that my aunt said, actually, I called my aunt and she said the same thing as was in the books. And I was just like, this is so uncanny. And she said, once I got back to Earth and I, was thinking about my near-death experience, my experience was filtered through the lens of my religious upbringing and my spirituality that I was raised in. So because she was Mormon at the time, she interpreted it through a Mormon lens. And then as she left Mormonism, she felt like she had more clarity as she was able to kind of change that filter. And that has also been shared quite a bit. And I started to see that, like, depending on what religion the individuals were prior to their experience, that was how they interpreted their near-death experience. It was almost confirming for them that their religion was true. And that's actually something that we see. There's a YouTube video out there on like spiritual confirmation, that their church is true. And it goes through, it's actually one that a lot of ex-Mormons use to say, look, Jehovah's Witnesses talk about, and I knew without a doubt, I had a feeling that told me that Jehovah's Witness was true, or that Allah was God, or that Buddhism was true, or that Catholicism was true, or Mormonism was true, or the Jonestown, one of the cults that they like died of suicide whatever later, that they prayed and they knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was true. And so I was like, okay, that elevated emotion is common, but so is interpreting near-death experiences through the lens of your earthly understanding, your religious beliefs. It tends to validate the previous held belief that you already have. And so the two books, Alex, can you go ahead and put one of them up and I'll talk about the one, whatever one you pick. Okay, so To Heaven and Back is about, I believe she was an orthopedic doctor or an orthopedic surgeon. I don't remember if she was atheist or not, but she was, one of the things that I liked about it is that we've got that scientific view, that medical view. Right. And so this individual, her name is Mary Neal, Dr. Neal. One of the things that she talked about was doing her best to look at her experience from that scientific lens and identifying the similarities in her experience to other experiences. So if you take away the religious belief or the filter, what is the same? And so she approaches it that way, but she was in a kayaking accident where she drowned. And if I remember correctly, she was under the water for like 17 to 30 minutes. And then she was in South America and they had to like hike her and then airvac her into hospitals. And so she was pronounced dead for a very prolonged period of time. And she explains in great detail what her experience was like. And what I loved about this book was the stripping down as much as she could of previous held beliefs, and then how this experience changed her life and changed her view of heaven and a higher deity. And she talks about ascending into the light, meeting a higher power. I don't remember if she conversed with a God or a Jesus, but that feeling of unconditional love and the confirmation that our intelligence, our being, our entity or something goes somewhere, and that there's actually a great deal of depression after returning to Earth because you don't feel that heightened sense of connectivity. Right. The other book that we talk about is a doctor. Go ahead, Alex. The Proof of Heaven. This doctor was atheist. He had, I believe, a brain infection, and he was a neurologist, if I remember correctly. So this man has spent his entire life studying the brain, and so he is brain dead for a prolonged period of time, has a near-death experience, and he talks about it as the proof of heaven. And if I remember correctly, in his experience, he didn't walk with Jesus, but that he had experiences where he knew that there were other beings, I'm going to say, there, and that they all loved him, and that he knew them, but he couldn't necessarily name them and whatnot. But again, that same thing, he feels that he was prayed back, and that there were a certain number of people that he met that he did know, but that there were hundreds of thousands, I believe, people. And it's been years since I read these, so some of the details of my synopsis might be off. But one of the things I loved about his book is that he was viewing it from the lens, again, we've got that medical, I'm going to try and strip it of, religious bias, right. But he was an atheist before and no longer is, but I believe that he walked away kind of with the same place that I'm at now, which is something is there, but I don't necessarily know how to define it or explain it.
And don't really feel the need to.
Other than what I experienced doesn't make sense, because on all the monitors that we have in this life to read brainwave activity, he went through his medical record. He was dead. And so, just having that experience for him was very significant. Then there was a movie that I don't remember, and they talked about walking and talking with Jesus, and that Jesus was more like fractals of color. So rather than him being white or Asian or black, it was almost like he was all of it, because he was very fractaled. And there's actually an image of Jesus that really resonates with me, as if there was a God, that's the one I would identify the most with. And he doesn't look anything like the Mormon Jesus or the Christian Jesus that's in paintings. It's very different. And I did not find that painting. I really need to go in and find that. And when I do, I'll post that on our social media pages. So that's kind of where, as I left Mormonism, I got really comfortable with not needing to know, but also kind of having a belief that there is something. And so instead of being atheist, I identify very much as agnostic, in the sense that I believe that there's truth in most religions, maybe even almost all religions. Even the toxic, unhealthy systems, religious systems, I believe that there is goodness there, because honestly, I believe that most people are good at their core, and that you wouldn't be able to get people wrapped up in these cult-like or toxic systems or these religious groups if there wasn't goodness. And I am in no way saying all religions are toxic or all religions are culty. Not at all. But religions, those that are pure in heart with, good, healthy intentions, and those that are controlling and not healthy, I believe that there's goodness there. And so I would say I'm agnostic in the sense of I want to hang on to the good and the healthy and release the toxic and the unhealthy parts of that. And that's kind of where I landed as I left Mormonism. And as I've tried to explain that to people, most people don't like my explanation, because again, I understand from neuroscience and from what I do, our brain has a desire to know the information. And frankly, our brain can't know when it comes to what comes next. We can believe, we can think, we can feel strongly about it, but we cannot know. So I'm okay saying I don't know until I have evidence.
That's
to demonstrate otherwise.
That's uncomfortable, because from a Christian religion basis, it's a commandment to know God. In John 17:3, it says, "This is life eternal, that they might know thee,
right,
the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent." So I think that there's an underlying need for it, because there's a scriptural basis for it.
So I would actually shift that and say our brain chemistry has an underlying need to know things, and the stuff in the Bible utilizes that human frailty to encourage faith and quote unquote knowledge.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And when I look at the Bible, I think that, Jesus, whether he was a divine person, a historical figure, just a normal dude, or a mythological human that we made stories about, there's a lot of goodness there that I can take. So I would say the Bible is, again, for me, a buffet. Portions of it are very spiritually significant for me, and portions of it are totally fucked up. I'm just gonna say that, because I don't really like the tantruming version of God that cuts the foreskins off of people or murders children, or that I'm just like, the Old Testament God is very fickle, and I don't believe in that at all. Not at all. And I also do not believe in a Satan at all. So a lot of the evil in the Bible, I just don't. I think people struggle enough with just the hardship of living a life, that hardship, we like to blame it on somebody. That's, again, a normal human tendency. Got to blame the hardship on something. So it's really easy to blame that on a evil figure like Satan. I don't believe that he's there. And for me, getting rid of a belief in Satan has helped me be more accountable for my role in things, and also to let go when, like my daughter has Crohn's disease. It's been horrible to let go of the idea that that's some sort of punishment or evilness. I mean, she has Crohn's. That makes our life hard. There's nobody to blame. Sometimes things just are. DNA, genetics, whatever. I'm going to blame.
So you've not had a near-death experience.
Correct.
What experiences have you had?
Are you trying to control the conversation so I don't rattle on forever?
I'm trying to help you not rattle on forever.
No, I'm ready to shift.
Control involved.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about your experiences that have led you to where you are.
I have two that I want to talk about today that are incredibly spiritual experiences that would be out of the norm for me. And so the first one, I have to give you some backstory. So in 2012, Mason and I decided that we were going to adopt again. And it was the first time that we decided to use a formal agency to help us accomplish that adoption. So we got our home study done. We got our pictures taken. We put our profile together. We got all the legal stuff done so that our home was legally ready. The legal pathway was cleared so that we were legally ready to adopt a child when a child was born. So once you have your legal pathway clear, the next step in the adoption is matching you with a birth mother. And the way that the agency that we went through did that was they had basically a little packet about our family and other families. And so when there was a mother that contacted them to help place their child for adoption, they would be given, they would fill out a form, what are some things that you want for your child? And then the agency would match the mother's desires with, 5 to 10 profiles. They would hand those profiles over to the birth mother. The birth mother would then be able to choose one or more of those profiles. And then the birth mother was able to interview the couple to see if it was a good fit. And then if it was a good fit, that match would be made and you would proceed with the adoption proceedings. Now, having said that, in the agency adoption world here in the United States, 1 in 4 mothers, I believe this is the statistic, is 25% birth mom's going to change her mind for some reason. So it's a pretty high percentage that you're going to have an adoption fall through because the birth mother changes their mind. And in most states, birth mom has a certain amount of time after giving birth to change her mind. However, in some states, they won't let birth mom even sign the papers until that time has lapsed. So I think it's in Arizona, birth mom cannot sign the paperwork for so many hours after the birth of the baby, because once she signs it, it's done. Her rights are terminated. as soon as that signature is presented, as soon as it's filed with the courts, it's over. So the only way that you would be able to take that back is if the attorney shredded it before it got filed with courts. So anyway, but in where we were at for this case, we were living in North Carolina and the babies were born in Philadelphia. So we got matched with a birth mom who was expecting twin girls. And so it was August 15th, I believe, we get a phone call. Mama has gone into labor early. Babies are going to probably be born within the next 24 to 48 hours. We had a really good friend at the time who was an OBGYN, and we called him up and we said, Mama's water broke. They're trying to keep the babies in. What's the likelihood? And he said, honestly, 24 to 48 hours, those babies are going to be born if her water broke. Like they're just going to be giving her steroids in order to try and help those lungs. But honestly, if the water's broken, the twins are coming, you need to get there. So we like whirlwind drove to Philadelphia so that Mason and I could be there for the birth of our twins. And Alex, if you can pull up the newborn baby pictures, not the NICU ones, but the ones of just the individual babies. So on August 16th, 2012, I'm sorry, I'm going to start crying. That's why we have Kleenex. Our baby girls were born. Here we have baby Madison, and the next one is baby Abigail. This is not the Abby that we have in our home now. We kept the name for our Abby, but these were our twin girls that were born on August 16th, 2012. And I was in the room. I was the first person to hold the babies. I was the first person to feed babies, other than the NICU nurses, of course. I was the first person to bathe babies. Go ahead and pull up the pictures of me with babies, Alex. I lived in the NICU. Mason, after the babies were born, Mason took our other kiddos home, went back to work, and Mason's mom was with Mason to help him take care of our kids while I was in the NICU with our girls. There I am with baby Madison, and the other one was baby Abigail. So I'm gonna start crying. Whew. After 6 days in the NICU, we were waiting. Mama didn't sign the papers, the adoption papers, because we were waiting for birth daddy to sign the papers, because birth mom had said that birth daddy was mentally unstable, and we didn't want mom to sign the papers until dad did, because they were concerned dad was a drug addict. He had something like 10 kiddos. Most of them were being raised in the foster system. And so the choice was, once dad signs his papers, then mom would sign hers. So that way, if dad didn't sign, mama didn't accidentally terminate her parental rights to the children. After 6 days in the NICU, what happened is there's our baby in the NICU. Hey, baby girl. After 6 days in the NICU with our babies, what had happened was, previously dad had asked the adoption agency, how much does it cost to adopt? And so the agency said, well, the birth family pays this much money. And somehow in his head, he got it stuck in his head that he was going to get some of that money. And so when he found out, that he wasn't going to get any of the money.
No, I can tell the story if you want to.
That's okay. Mason actually talked about this in his episode that he did solo, but after dad found out that he wasn't going to get any of the money, he refused to sign the papers. And then he and I met, because I was like, look, just meet me. Because he didn't want the girls. The thing that was really hard for me is that he refused to sign the papers, but he didn't want to father them. His plan was to give the girls to his sister and let her raise them. And that is actually what ended up happening. I met him, and he told me that he would sign the papers if I gave him $10,000. And the challenge with that is that's called human trafficking, and it's illegal. It's a federal offense. And I was like, I can't break the law. I can't give you money. And the adoption agency had called me and said, hey, dad is asking for money. And they had warned me. They were like, you absolutely cannot. And I was like, no, I know this is not my first adoption. But they were like, if you do that, it's a federal offense. You'll go to prison. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And I tried to explain to him, look, they'll be in a good home. We believe in open adoption. Our first two boys that were adopted both had open adoptions at the time. And we were like, look, you can still be a part of their life since you don't want to raise them. They can come to us and you can, call them when you want. You can see them. We'll keep that open. I'm a firm believer in open adoption. And he said no, and he refused to sign the papers. So we had to go home without our babies. And it was devastating. The thing that was even more devastating is that the girls went home with their mom after they were released from the NICU. I think they were about 6 weeks old, 6 to 8 weeks old when they were released from the NICU, and they went home with their mom, and within a few months, the foster system picked them up. And I believe they were in the foster system till they were around 9 months old, and then the foster system awarded custody to the father's twin sister. And twin sister lived with her mom's boyfriend, and he was a sexual predator of minors. I grieved horrifically after losing the twins. Lots of info in between there, but I'm going to skip forward to my spiritual experience. In 2016, it was Christmas Day when we were at the Mormon church. I remember this day very clearly because I think, Mason, you must have forgotten that it was Christmas or something. You were singing in the choir and everybody was wearing red, green, or white in the Mormon choir for the Christmas program that they put on in their sacrament meeting. And Mason had worn his purple suit. So everybody's up on the stand singing the Christmas song, and everybody's in red, green, and white, except for Mason, who is in a very bright purple
Dare to be different.
suit. Dare to be different on Christmas Day. Oh my goodness. So many people loved it. And so many people were like, what was he thinking? He ruined the whole program. Anyway, really funny. But I was sitting there, it's Christmas morning, 2016, and all of a sudden, I get this wave of aching for baby Madison, who had been renamed Mariah by her. So for me, we named them Madison and Abigail. And then when the adoption fell through, they were named Mariah and Amaya. And I get this ache, and it's just for one of them. It's just for Madison, just for Mariah. And I'm listening to this Christmas music, and all of a sudden I'm bawling. And I feel a little girl climb into my lap and hug me and whisper the words, I love you, Mama. Thank you for loving me. And I was flabbergasted. I'm sitting at church and I'm rocking, like I'm holding my heart and I'm rocking with my eyes closed. And Landon at the time, he would have been what, Mason, in 2016? He would have been
5.
5?
Mm-hmm.
Was he really? No, he wasn't 5. He was born in,
5.
Yeah, he was 5.
Don't question my math.
Okay, so Landon was 5, and he goes, Mama, whose baby are you rocking? He's sitting next to me, and I was like, I don't know, baby. And I just rocked, and that feeling lasted for about 10 minutes. And then baby Mariah said, I have to go now, Mommy. And the experience was over. And 5 days later, I got a Facebook message from Jennifer, who is their birth mom. Alex, go ahead and pull up the news story. Baby Mariah was murdered on Christmas Eve, 2016 by DeMarcus Heath. There she is. That's my beautiful baby. In August or October of 2016, the judge awarded custody back to Jennifer from aunt. They had some secret, like Jennifer was basically being their mom. And so the judge gave custody back to Mama. And 3 months later, one of the twins was murdered by birth mom's boyfriend. Now, he ended up pleading guilty about a year later when he went to trial. He pled guilty to giving her too strong of a bear hug and cracking her ribs, which damaged her aorta. That was what they let him plead. So he agreed to plead guilty. He was sentenced with 20 years in prison. I'm sorry. It's really hard to see my baby. She's beautiful. When I sat in the courtroom, so let me go backwards. I'm sorry. Jennifer asked me in that call 5 days later, she said, Sarah, can you please come back and adopt Amaya and their older sister? So Samaya was 2 years older than the twins. And she says, can you come back, please, and adopt Amaya, who's the surviving twin, and Samaya, they need a home where they're going to be loved. And I said, yes. So we went back into court proceedings. We once again got our home ready for adoption. We did the home study. We did everything that we could. And then we went and we sat in the court. So that way the judge was aware that, that we were a family, that we had been there the day that they were born, and that we still wanted to take Amaya home, and that we were willing to adopt Samaya as well. So the girls at that time were 4 and 6. And when I sat in the courtroom and listened to the forensic investigator, the gentleman that did the autopsy, the forensic autopsy on the girl, on Mariah, what was found was that her aorta had torn, and she had bled out. I think it was her aorta, what is the big vessel that, yeah, that she had some cracked, broken ribs, I believe, and that there was some head trauma as well. The forensic investigator said that what he saw looked like there had been a head-on collision with the vehicle traveling at least 35 miles per hour, and that the only way that that could have occurred, it couldn't have occurred through a bear hug. Let me just put it that way. I'm sorry. The judge couldn't make a decision. The judge that was over our case, over the case, was the same judge that had granted custody back to mom. And my theory is that he felt so horrifically guilty for giving custody back to the mom so that this baby could be murdered. But he basically said he was not going to give the kids to us because we didn't live in North Carolina at the time. We were living in Texas. And he said he was not going to do that. And eventually the girls went back with their father, despite the fact that he admitted on the stand that he was dealing drugs, that he was using drugs, and not just marijuana. He was dabbling in some pretty hardcore drugs. And it's a mystery. The attorney that we had said if it had been any other judge, that after that event, after Mariah passed away, that judge didn't make another decision in the courthouse that was solid for like years. He began to be known as the judge that would kick the can. And I think a lot of that had to do with he was struggling with some pretty bad trauma. But anyway, we didn't get the girls. The reason I tell this story is because I felt Mariah come to me before I knew that she was dead. 5 days before I knew that she was dead. And I physically felt her weight and her like bony knees type feeling climb into my lap. It was a sensation that I cannot explain away, but it was real. And the whispering of her cute little voice in my ear is as tangible as anything could be. And so I believe in an existence after death, because at that point she would have been, I believe that she was murdered right around midnight. So Christmas Eve, almost Christmas morning. And so she would have been deceased less than 24 hours when I had that experience. Need a minute. Do you have anything you want to say, Mason? Because I need a break. Talk, Mason.
No, you took the whole story.
The next story isn't as profound. to hear, but it is for me. So we are Daisy Girl Communications. That is
we are farmers. Boom, 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 boom.
Okay, now we need some money from Farmers Insurance, right? We'll need to say, hey, we just gave you a free shout out. Pay us and pay us.
We are Daisy Girl.
So we are Daisy Girl Communications. And the reason that we are Daisy Girl Communications is that in 2013, 2014, in my clinic, in my internship, I ended up interning at a clinic that utilized therapy animals to assist in the treatment of anxiety and depression. And so I took a course on how to train an animal to become a service animal or a therapy animal in a clinic. And I had a dog and her name was Daisy. So Alex, whenever you're ready, we would love to see a picture of Miss Daisy. Daisy is the white dog here with her buddy Shelby, but Daisy was a Schnauzer mix. And so standard, she weighed about 45 pounds. And we had owned her since about 2009, 2010. And so in 2013, I had her trained to be a service animal. And one of the things that was amazing is that my son Landon was born just an anxious baby. He was a very nervous baby. And Mason was deployed and gone a lot because he, just for your medical training and your military assignments, he was gone all the time. And Daisy became my partner, truly, because when I couldn't handle baby tears or I needed a break, I could tell my kiddo. So Alex, if you want to pull up pictures, there's Landon who's having a tantruming meltdown, and I would say, please go love on Daisy. And he would go and he would cry into her fur just like this. He would sit on her. That's Abby, my Abby, and Landon with Daisy. She became my partner. She followed me everywhere I went. When I was overwhelmed and crying, she would jump up on the bed and she would soothe me. And so she became my first experience with the power of a service animal. I also got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis for the first time around 2013. And so when I was struggling to walk or I would get these tremors that I couldn't control, Daisy would come and lay next to me, and her weight would help it not hurt as bad, and the heat of her body next to mine. There was a lot of joint pain that we just couldn't explain. And so Daisy and I bonded differently than I ever had with any animal. In 2019, the end of 2019, when we moved here, Daisy had an abrupt personality change where she started to basically kill everything in sight. She killed a couple of our cats. She killed like 50 squirrels in a day. And she'd always been a squirrel catcher killing and eating squirrels was Daisy's thing. She would go in the backyard and she would pretend to be like dead, pretend to be asleep. And then a squirrel would jump from one of our trees in our backyard at our house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, to the other tree in our backyard. And she would jump up and snap it out of midair. And then she would eat it. And then she would bring us the heads. She was very kind, almost like a cat in that way. But in 2019, she had an abrupt personality change. She started growling at my kids. And she ended up biting our UPS guy. And we took her in and she had a brain tumor. And so we had to put her down. And so one day Mason was gone. This was during the 11 months where the Army had messed up our orders. And so, I'm going to start crying again. The Army had messed up our orders. So Mason was in Texas for the first 11 months that the kids and I were in Missouri. And I lost my partner in crime. My youngest 3 kids all have significant struggles with emotional regulation. Landon struggles with some pretty good anxiety. He's always been an anxious baby. And then Abby has a whole host of letters after her diagnoses and Crohn's disease, and then Tyler has some PTSD and some trauma. And losing Daisy meant that I was alone and I had to co-regulate. It didn't matter how burned out I was. I no longer had a dog that I could say go cry with, because Shelby, in the picture of Daisy and Shelby was not there for the kids. Shelby was there for Daisy. So Shelby was Daisy's therapy dog and Daisy was ours. And when I lost Daisy and I was alone, I went into a numbed, dissociated haze. And I actually got this tattoo on my wrist. I'll come in closer here. It was a lot more simple the first time, but if you can see, I've got a daisy there. And then I've named my production communication publication company after Daisy Girl. That's what we called her. So that's why we are Daisy Girl Communications. I was surprised by the depth of my grief of losing Daisy. I was truly dysfunctional for about 2 to 3 weeks. I called off my clinic day. I laid in bed a lot. I was significantly depressed. And I remember it was within 48 hours of putting her down. I also felt guilty that I'd put her down. I didn't want to put her down. Like I felt like I was killing her. And not that it was the most humane or appropriate thing to do, because she had gone from a perfect dog to dangerous. And I understand that she wouldn't have lived a whole lot longer anyway, because she had a very aggressive form of cancer that was attacking her brain. She was 11 or 12 at the time when we put her down. But it didn't matter. I felt like it was my fault. And I remember falling asleep. Now, Daisy had never slept with us overnight because Mason doesn't like having dogs sleep with us. And that's changed, because after Daisy, I was like, I don't care, the dog is sleeping with us, poor guy. But Daisy never slept in our bed, but I remember climbing into bed and crying. I was alone. And I felt, again, a weight and almost like this telepathic communication of, I feel better now. And I knew that it was Daisy in the bed with me. And it lasted for about 30 minutes as I bawled. And I think I pet the sheets. Like I was just like petting the sheets and crying. But there was like this knowledge and almost this permission that I received from Daisy that she wasn't mad at me and that she felt better, that she was able to move better. She had been getting old for a while. She'd had some arthritis in her hips and her legs and was having a hard time moving around. And despite all of that, she still let the kids just lay all over her and would call them. So because of those 2 spiritual experiences that came for me, I strongly believe that there is something. I don't know what it is. I believe that we as humans are intrinsically connected, and that as we work hard to bring goodness and love without condition, that we collectively glorify this higher power or this energy. And when we harm others, that we take away from that. That if I'm harming somebody intentionally, that really I'm also harming myself. And that's really where I've landed. I wouldn't say that I'm atheist at all. But I don't need to know what that higher power is to believe in the existence of something greater than myself that connects us with all living creatures. All living things, really. I believe that we're connected in nature. And I know it sounds almost a little hokey, but I truly believe that plants and nature has a spirit as well, almost like the book in Aragon where you're like waking the old tree up. I believe that the Native American people who believe in like a great spirit, I would say that when I hear those stories, so I'm not Native American at all, but when I hear those stories from my Native friends, that it really resonates in me. So I believe that the earth has its own spirit, or a lot of people you'll hear talk about vibrations or energy. I believe that that's what it is, but I don't necessarily label it because I don't feel like we have the words to adequately describe what it is or its significance.
It's called the Force.
The Force, like in Star Wars, the Force, we're going to call it the Force now. Thank you, Mason.
It's been around for a while. About time you caught up.
But that's my story. So
Do we have any comments or
questions?
questions?
Yeah. All right, so we don't have any comments today, which is fine. I'm going to be honest, I am emotionally spent. And so, Mason, do you have anything you want to say? And we will go ahead and close out for today.
I think just as you deconstruct patterns that have existed in your life, that's what we're going through, certainly what I'm going through. I think keeping your heart and your mind open for the possibilities I think that's important. I think that having a relationship with people around you and with other things around you can be very valuable. And I think that can strengthen us in our reconstructing process as we try to put things back together. I think that having that open mind towards what spirituality can be for me and what it has been for others is very beneficial.
Yeah, I think that I want to place a cautionary call of action. I know that when I was Mormon, people would share things with me and I would feel like, oh, your spiritual experience is lacking because you don't have the Mormon truth of what God is. And so let me try and help you make your experience more profound. And I see that happening across all religions. I'm sorry for all of the things that I said when I was Mormon. I didn't need a Mormon lens to increase or make better my moments with my Madison or Mariah, or with Daisy. I didn't need anything from the Mormon church. They came on their own when I needed them. They were healing for me both times. And so I would encourage our viewers and our listeners to just accept the significance, like believe the person that is telling you the story, that their experience was significant to them. You don't need to interpret that. You don't need to redefine it. You don't need to poke holes in how their spiritual experience isn't significant for them. Let it be. Until today, I had only shared my experience with holding Mariah with maybe 3 people in my life because it was that powerful, and it's been years now. And the experience with Daisy, I think I've only ever shared that with you. I don't think I've ever shared that. So sharing it here is very vulnerable for me.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, go big or go home. But I know that there will be naysayers, and that's fine. But when we naysay in our communities, when somebody is sharing something like this, we cause a great deal of harm. So
I think that what happens when you have naysayers and stuff like this is that they have made their impression of what is real more important than the ability to connect with other people. And I think that's what's missing there. If you have an experience that you share, and my first thought is, whatever, I've already lost an opportunity to connect with someone on a very real, vulnerable level.
Well, because what you perceive is real, what I experienced was real for me. And you're basically saying what was real for you wasn't real.
Right. And that doesn't, I'm not here to judge whether or not the experience was real or fake or made up or whatever. I'm not here to judge that, because for you, it was powerful. For you, it meant something. I've not had any experiences like that. I couldn't look at any experience I've had in my life that would be anywhere near that kind of a thing. But by being able to share that experience with you, it makes us closer. It makes me better able to understand who you are and what is important in your life. It's a lot of times that's happened far later than it probably needed to, or certainly far later than it could have. And if I can learn to accept those experiences as they are when they are, then that connection can happen sooner, and we can grow together through it.
Well, because for me, it meant that there was something greater than me. There was some power greater than me that saw my need to connect with two beings that I loved implicitly.
It also meant that those two beings loved you the same.
Right. They loved me.
We didn't spend very much time with those girls at all.
I did.
I mean, even then,
6 days in the NICU.
6 days is not a lot of time.
Correct. In the grand scheme of things.
And especially when you're talking about a baby in the NICU, they're not going to remember that period.
Right. In this life, those girls don't know who I am.
They have no idea who you are, except that they've been told about you. But the fact that then she could come and sit with you and comfort you during that time. When I
wasn't grieving.
Yeah.
I truly believe she came to me. I wasn't grieving. I didn't know yet.
I don't think it was for you. I think it was for her.
But she came.
Yeah.
And she called me mommy. So
looking for the connection is the big piece there, whether it's a connection with God or a higher being, or just a connection with the people that we love in our lives. That all strengthens our ability to be spiritual people and empathetic. And
so we would love to hear about your experiences. I know I'm not alone. I've heard many accounts of a deceased being, a mother, a father, a grandmother, a cousin, a brother, a sister, an aunt coming to people after they are deceased, and that bringing them great peace. I would love to hear your experiences and have a conversation with you about that significance. So if you feel so inclined, we would love to have that conversation with you. You can email me at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. Thank you so much. We will see you at our next one, and we will announce that date in our July newsletter. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.